This is Unhurried, and I'm your host, Doug Kyle. You know, life can feel like a race, rushing to the next thing, never time to reflect. But there is incredible value in slowing down with God to take in His perspective, His presence, His pace. Where do we put our faith in the middle of a storm? And is it possible to put it in the wrong place? This is episode 9 of season 2 of Unhurried. I'm your host, Doug Kyle. We're featuring Ryan Viramontes, who's our producer and podcast hobbit and all the other titles that have kind of come along the way. Welcome to our listeners and viewers who are joining along. You can catch us on all the podcast places as well as YouTube. So It's great to have you following along with us. And I get to hear every Sunday, several people usually mention to me that they're following along. So I love it.
Yeah,
I know you get to hear comments too of people that are listening and viewing.
Yeah, I actually had 2 great conversations this past Sunday in the lobby about how much people have been following along and listening.
Yeah. So what kind of stuff?
Well, it was really funny because one person told me that they enjoyed me on the podcast, and I was like, they were asking, like, well, do you guys prepare? Like, how much, and I was like, we do, right? Like, we talk about what we're gonna, talk about and things like that. And I go, but we just kind of go for it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And she was saying, she's like, well, it's just really awesome to listen to, the both of you and stuff like that. Yeah. And I was like, well, thanks. I was like, I'm definitely the second fiddle here in this production,
So people tell you on Sunday they like listening to you.
Sure.
And people tell me they like listening to you as well.
Oh my gosh.
So that's all I'm hearing. It's great, right?
Yeah.
So
well, I feel like you bring so much to the table, and I try and add as much as I can, but you're the wise one,
I actually have I had several really good questions and comments after this past Sunday's message that I'm going to incorporate in today's podcast.
Nice.
So I really am going to almost just use that as sort of a way of kind of working through, our follow-up to the message on Sunday.
Yeah,
so
great.
Anyway, this is supposed to be like sitting down having a cup of coffee together after the Sunday message. Maybe you're listening to this on a Thursday or a Saturday morning, or who knows, during the week you're listening to it. But the mindset, whether you have a hot drink in front of you or whether you're out running around doing errands, hopefully there's a chance to kind of slow down, think a little bit about what we talked about. If you did get a chance to hear the message, then the middle of the week is kind of a great time to just bring it back to mind and kind of reflect a little further on it. But even for those who didn't have a chance to hear the message, these are meant to also stand alone, and hopefully it's something of value for you to be listening to too. Speaking of coffee, you've got 2 cups of coffee in front of you. So what is
everybody?
Yeah. So if you're watching, you can see he's double sipping here. So if Ryan is really caffeinated by the end of this, really amped up, you'll know why.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a good thing I have a 9:00 hockey game tonight.
Oh, okay.
So we have the late start and and the early games. If anything gets delayed in the early games, there's been times the game hasn't started until like 9:30.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is late, so I think this is going to come in handy for me later on.
Yeah, you might need
today.
it later on. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a late game.
It's late, super late. I know.
All right. Well, awesome. That's great. Well, we're glad to have you along. The series that we're looking at in this podcast right now is the idea of Jesus wants to know, and we're looking at these questions that Jesus asked in his encounters with various individuals in the Gospels, and how those questions, many of them, are questions that we can live with. They are really profound questions. We've made the observation along the way that Jesus never asked a question because he needed information. He always asked because he wanted to reveal something in the listener, and they still do that. These questions still have that power to do that. The bumper for this is kind of I love it. It's kind of a fresh look at it's for those who haven't seen it, it's like magnets on a refrigerator door.
Yeah.
that say Jesus wants to know, and then either sticky notes or those, I think they call them like, I don't know, they're like whole words that they're magnets that you kind of can.
Yeah, I don't know what they're called.
You can make up your own sentence on the refrigerator by jumbling the words around. Sure. And anyway, Noah puts that together. Right. Does a great job.
The third member of our team,
the invisible member who's always somehow present.
Yeah.
He puts that together. So this past Sunday, I said, if anybody has those magnets at home and puts, you could put these questions on your refrigerator and live with it during the week. Sort of what this podcast is meant to be, is kind of midweek. And someone sent me a photo.
Really?
Sunday afternoon, they took the question for this week, which is, where is your faith?
Yeah.
And they put the magnets on the refrigerator. So extra points for that.
Yeah, for sure.
For that listener, and I hope she's listening along and hears that. I saw the photo and I loved it.
Awesome.
But that is the question that we're living with from Jesus: is where is your faith? It's the idea of it's possible to put our faith in the wrong place, even as believers, even as those who follow Jesus. We can put our faith in the wrong place. It can be misplaced. And so when Jesus asked the question, where is your face? I said that several times on Sunday morning. I laughed at myself in the message. I said face instead of faith. Where? He didn't ask, where's your face?
Where's your face?
He said, where is your faith? Actually, never mind.
This just goes to prove this is live recording.
This is live. I was thinking if you slid off the screen, I could say, "Where's your face?"
Right. Yeah.
So there we go. Where is your face? Now there we go. Anyway, the question is, where is your faith? And the story is a famous one in the scriptures where Jesus calms a storm. It's the disciples are in the boat. And he asks this timeless question, where is your faith? And it's possible to misplace our faith. Here's what was interesting to me as I prepared for the message. Actually, 3 out of the 4 Gospels record this story.
Yeah.
So Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell this story. So what does that tell us? Well, first of all, this is a memorable story for the disciples. All of them, most of them wanted to record the story. All of them remembered it, and most of them wanted to record it. It also tells us of the importance of the story because it's told 3 different times. Obviously, the Holy Spirit inspiring the scriptures felt like this was something that we should revisit time and time again as we're reading through the scriptures. And all of them, every time, the story really makes the main big point. The punchline of the story each time is, who is this? The disciples are marveling at Jesus, who's able to calm the wind and the storm with just his word.
Yeah.
And it was a moment in their relationship with Jesus where they were seeing him as way more powerful than they already imagined. Here's a guy who was teaching amazing things, doing great miracles, but to see him stop nature or calm nature and control the weather in the storm was just this powerful, eye-opening experience for all of them. They all end with this revelation of Jesus, and I think that's what the story is meant to primarily tell us, is this bigger picture of who Jesus is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and how powerful he was. And how cool that must have been in that moment to be, and it reminds me of one of those, when you were talking about it, it reminds me of like, like in families or even friends you go to school with or you've known for a long time, you kind of start to repeat some of the same stories, like my best friend and I, it's like, we like tell the same 5 stories over and over of like when we got in trouble when we were 12 or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, but for the disciples, if they told that story over and over, and that moment of powerful, it's just, it's incredible.
Yeah. It's a bonding thing for them. We were there, we experienced it, and they love telling the story again and again. Yeah. That's a great point of why it happened like that. So what's interesting and then I'm going to geek out on this just a little bit. When you study the different gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are actually called the synoptic gospels. They're the most similar, and that's what that means. they each one has a little different angle on it, which we should expect.
Right.
So they each had a little different audience that they were writing to, and each one had kind of a different take from their own experience. And so we see these subtle differences in the story, and to me that actually is so fascinating to me. The different things that they come out. So I just going to give a little bit of a review. If you read all three of the stories in the Bible, these are the things that all of them have in common. They all get into a boat together. In all of them, Jesus falls asleep. In all of them, there's this big storm, and when the storm hits, the disciples are fearing they're going to drown.
Right.
Jesus then rebukes the wind, and that word rebuke is important. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then he asks the disciples this question about faith, and they all end the same, as I already said, with them being amazed at who Jesus is and that he could even control. They end with a question: who is this?
Right.
Their minds are blown. And what they say. So that's true in all of the stories. That's the kind of the big point, the thing that they always would talk about when they're together.
Right.
So Mark, who I was in Luke, but Mark adds some details that weren't in Luke's story. So Mark tells us that this was happening in the evening. So instead of just a particular day, it was actually the part of the day that this was evening, which to me adds some drama to it. The sun is going down. It's being lost in the waves at dark is even scarier.
Well, and especially us as humans being in the ocean or in the water, like we're at such a disadvantage.
Oh yeah,
you know, like,
absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like that's an important detail, you know?
Yeah, it is. I did bring that out because to me that adds to the story to know that. Mark also has this really curious thing that I really don't know what to do with, but he says there were other boats with them. So apparently the disciples and Jesus were in a boat, but some of the other followers of Jesus were like, they must have heard him say, let's go to the other side. And they're like, well, let's go with them.
Yeah.
So there are other boats. We don't know anything about those boats, what happened, who was in them, whether they were as, in peril as this boat was. Right. We just don't know. But there were some other boats there. So that's a kind of an interesting detail.
That is interesting.
In Mark, they ask the question when the disciples wake Jesus up, they add, don't you care that we're going to drown? I like that. And I actually leaned into that a little bit, that sometimes what we do is we doubt Jesus' care for us when in the middle of a storm. So I think that's kind of a cool part of the story. Yeah. Mark also tells us that when Jesus rebuked the wind, it tells us his words. The other ones don't tell us what, it just tells them that tells us that he rebuked him. But Mark says, he said, quiet, be still. Now that could be a whole nother message. I love that so much. That to me, that reminds me of Psalm 42, where there's where the famous verse about be still and know that I'm God. And if you look at the context of that is not God telling our souls to be still. That's God telling the forces of nature to be still. And so Jesus is really echoing that here, as he says, be still to those things that threaten us. It's really a cool connection there
that is cool.
in Mark. And I did a whole podcast last year on my signature verse from this Psalm. Yeah. So if anybody wants some, got extra time, go back and catch that. Yeah. And think about the connection with the story, which would be a really powerful. In Mark's version, he asks two questions. It's not just about their faith, but he says, why are you so afraid? The first question. And then he says, do you still have no faith? So that's a different take on his question than ours, which is, where is your faith? In Mark, he says, do you still have no faith? Hold on to that for a second, because I'm going to come back to that. But then it ends with the same punchline. Who is this? The power of Jesus. Right. So that's Mark. Mark has, again, you look at that and it adds some layers to the story, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. And then Matthew, he doesn't get. I think this is really interesting about Matthew, and it's kind of consistent with some of the other ways that he treats the stories of Jesus. But there's no instructions from Jesus, let's go to the other side, like there are in the other two stories. It just says that they get in the boat following Jesus. And so it just describes that they are following Jesus. And to me, the emphasis is on if you follow Jesus, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's storms, sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's hard, but it's still part of what it means to follow Jesus. So the focus on being disciples, which is big in Matthew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the disciples cry out, "Save us, we're going to drown." So they add that phrase, "save us," which is kind of, relatable. Matthew is the only one that flips the order. Instead of having Jesus rebuke the wind and the waves and then ask the disciples about their faith,
right.
This one he actually asks them about their faith first, and then he stops the storm.
Right.
And in that case, he says, "Why, you have little faith."
Right.
So we've got, track with me. Mark says no faith.
Yeah.
Matthew says little faith. And then Luke, our passage, where is your faith? Misplaced faith.
Yeah.
And it ends with the same punchline.
Yeah.
Who is this? The power of Jesus. So all of a sudden, we didn't have time to do that on Sunday. But when you look at all of them, to me, it becomes this. The movie is there.
Right.
I can picture the movie now.
For sure.
All the different layers to it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Or the episode from Jesus's life, which would be fascinating, and why the disciples love talking about this.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it just goes to show that when Jesus came to earth, he was reinforcing the passages in the Old Testament. And the disciples at that point, you would have to assume that they were very familiar with the Old Testament.
Yep.
And especially being with Jesus all the time, he probably was very much teaching on that. We've picked up on some Doug-isms around the office and things like that, things that you say, as our shepherd, and so you would have to assume that he would be saying these things to them. And so when he says that to them, where's your faith? You know what I mean? Like all these different questions that he throws back at them, he's almost kind of going like, guys, come on. You know what I mean? Like, come on. You know what I mean? Like, like you know the passages, you have a personal relationship with God, what's going on,
Yeah, exactly. And those questions both probably stung a little bit when he asked them, but also caused them to really look deep inside and reveal something in them, and reveal what Jesus was trying to do. Exactly. So Luke, I ended up landing with Luke to tell the story, and the reason that I liked it. Luke had some features that the other ones didn't have. For example, Luke, who often gives these kind of cool little details that the others leave out. He's the only one that tells us that the boat was being swamped, that the water was coming in, and they were about to, kind of how they were about to drown, that the boat was about to sink. And he also tells that they were in great danger, which would have been typical of Luke to really bring that point out, that this was a serious situation. It wasn't just that they thought it was bad; it really was bad. But mostly the reason I loved Luke is because of the way that Jesus phrases the question there: where is your faith? So it's not just about no faith or little faith, it's about misplaced faith.
Right.
And if you think about it, we need all three of those questions, or three of those encounters with Jesus that come to us in the Gospels when we think about our faith, because sometimes we have no faith. Even as disciples, even as followers of Jesus, there's times when we're acting as if we have no faith at all, or we're living our lives, and it feels like we don't have an ounce of belief, trust in us. We're just so paralyzed by the situation. Other times, we have little faith. Well, it needs to grow.
Right.
It needs to develop. And then there's this third option, and that is there's times when our faith is misplaced.
Yeah.
It's put in the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the part that I wanted us to live with. And today, as you guys think about this as listeners, I want you to think about too. Where is your faith? There were in the message I talked about 3 places that we can misplace it. Sometimes we put our faith in ourselves, just like the disciples who were pretty accomplished on the waters. They probably felt like they were in their strength, their skill set when they were there in the boat on the waters, and yet their abilities were not enough, but sometimes we put our faith in ourselves and our abilities and what we think we can accomplish. Sometimes we put our faith, beyond that, not just in ourselves, but we put it in the idea that if Jesus is in the boat, everything's going to be smooth sailing.
Right. Right.
And you think, it's so easy to think that, right? Just think, well, Jesus is in my situation. He's in the middle of my life. He's in the middle of this situation. Everything's going to fall in place.
Right.
And
right.
Not necessarily the case.
No, not at all. No.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then the third thing was faith in faith. Sometimes we just think, if I have enough faith, everything's going to work out just fine. This story in each of the Gospels challenges that, because the disciples are not these models of faith. They're not these, amazing faith-filled individuals. Instead, they're no faith, they're little faith, they're misplaced faith.
Right.
They come to us as kind of relatable characters.
Yes, very much
us,
so. Yeah, very much so.
And because of that, we realize that it's not our faith that is necessary. It's the one our faith is in.
Yeah.
We can have very little faith, but if it's in the right thing, it's going to happen.
Right. Well, I think on Sunday you said like something about like the problem with having the faith in faith is that it's not misplaced, but I think you said it was like it depends on our passion. It's like we're very passionate about something, and then the storm comes in and you go, oh, wait a minute. Like, I need help. Like, where's Jesus? What's going on? The walls are closing in. It's like we're passionate about it. And then all of a sudden things go wrong. And then all of our passion is, misplaced.
Yeah. It just like the air goes out of the balloon.
Yes.
And it's gone.
Yeah.
But there's a strong teaching in Christian circles that if we just have enough faith, everything's going to work out.
Everything's going to work out.
And it makes it feel like, to me, like we're the switch, the light switch on the wall.
Yeah.
And God is the electricity. He's the power, but it's up to us to turn the switch on. And to me, it's like if that's the case, God's hands are tied until I drum up enough faith, that's not what I see in Scripture. I don't see that with the disciples.
No.
There are times that they were very filled with faith, and other times that they were pretty pathetic with their faith.
Right.
And anywhere in between, it was really what Jesus was wanting to do and what he chose to do. And he wanted to bring them into the life of faith that would align themselves with what he was already doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, sometime over the years, I've kind of used the analogy of that, I could have, I drive a 1973 Volkswagen bus.
Yes.
All right. It's fun. It's classic, but it's not the most reliable vehicle in the world.
Right.
If I could say I am going to drive from here to, from San Diego, the corner of the United States, all the way to Maine in that bus. And I could have as much faith, I really believe this is going to happen. There's no question I'm going to make it. And I could have a lot of faith, but if the vehicle isn't reliable, it doesn't matter how much I believe.
Right.
If the vehicle itself isn't, which honestly, it probably wouldn't make it. But let's say I really believed it, it's not going to make it any more likely to make it to Maine.
Right.
On the other hand, there's people that are just terrified of flying. They just can't, for them, it's the hardest thing. They could, need to go from San Diego to Maine, let's say, and they get, they in fear and trembling get on that plane and they think for sure that we're going to crash. This is not going to, they're just terrified. But they make it just fine.
Right.
They had very little faith,
but
what their faith, just stepping on the airplane, taking that small step of faith, even though it was a mustard seed of faith, it wasn't very much.
Right.
It wasn't their faith that got, but it was what their faith was in.
Yes.
It was the reliability. In this case, let's say a reliable airplane, which these days they're not always that case, but you get the analogy. Well, follow the analogy.
Yes, I got you. I got you. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is I think sometimes people will say like ignorance, is bliss, right? Like if you don't put your faith in anything, and you just go without, then I almost feel like that's almost just as dangerous as putting your faith in something that doesn't need to have your faith in it. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, of course it's gonna land, it's gonna whatever, it'll be fine. You know what I mean? But it's like, we need to be able to put our faith in Jesus, but then also back that up with also his teachings and his words.
Right. Yeah. And it's subtle, but the difference between faith in Jesus and faith in faith.
Yes.
And our faith needs to be in Jesus, who is reliable.
Yes.
Regardless of if we're no faith, growing faith, or misplaced faith.
Right.
Jesus is the reliable place, not our faith.
Right.
That was sort of the, it's, I got a lot of comments about that after the message, and I think that was something that was worth thinking a little bit about. So one of the comments that I had after the message was this. Someone asked me, didn't they have some faith, the disciples, because they went to Jesus? At least they went to him, and so I think it was like a little confusing.
Sure.
Was their faith completely misplaced because at least they went to Jesus? And I think that's what all these stories show us. When you look at all three Gospels, they did have some faith, but it was just it was growing and it was immature, and Jesus wanted. And you're right, they went to Jesus, which was the right thing. But even when they went to Jesus, what they said was, "We're going to drown," which didn't show a whole lot of faith, But they had a little bit of faith, and that's the point. I think Jesus meets us wherever we are in our progress with faith, and then wants to, grow that.
Right.
And so I do think that I think that was a great point. They did have some faith. At least they went to Jesus. But at that point, he still wanted to show them that they were probably more, until that point, they probably were more trusting in their own abilities, or the fact that they think, it's going to happen without any problems.
Well, that thought just came to me, where it's like, I wonder how long they were battling the storm before they went to Jesus, because they probably were overconfident in their abilities as being fishermen and being on the water, and probably spent, between all of them, had years and years of experience, so they probably didn't go to Jesus right away. They had their faith in their ability to be able to battle through it. They're like, oh, we've seen this before, it's fine. And then it just got gradually worse and worse and worse, and finally they were like, okay, we need to get Jesus involved here, So, I don't know. I just, that thought just came to me right now.
No, I think you're right. I think if we were to go level 1 to level 10 of how serious the problem was, at 1, 2, 3, they weren't going to Jesus at all. 4, 5, 6, they're still going, we can handle this.
We got this.
7, 8, now they're starting to worry. It gets to 9 and they hit panic button, and they wake Jesus up.
Right.
And isn't that the way we are too?
Yeah, totally.
We feel like the early, level 1 through 5.
I got this.
We got this.
We got this. Yeah.
6 and 7, maybe I should, should I wake Jesus up? Is this the time to pray?
Yeah.
It gets, suddenly the numbers get kind of high, and we're like, okay, this is panic time. I better bring Jesus in.
Yeah.
In reality, Jesus wants to be a part of the 1 through the 10.
Right. Exactly.
He wants to be there from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
When we're feeling good and confident in our abilities, and when we're feeling over our heads.
Right.
Every place in between, Jesus wants to be a part of that.
I think you said that yesterday too, where I can't remember exactly what you said, but you basically said that Jesus wants to be involved in every step, but we kind of just pull him off this. I don't remember how your analogy, but not off the shelf, but basically it's like we get him involved almost too late in the game sometimes. Yes, he can solve all of the things, and he can calm the storm, and he can settle our spirits and all of those things, but we kind of just pull them out when it's panic time, and not in the in-betweens. I don't remember. You said it elegantly yesterday,
I don't remember what I said either, but what you're saying is that, especially, we tend to think if I'm in my skill set, I don't need him.
Right. I think that's how you said it. Yeah.
And so but the reality is even when we're in our skill set, even when we're doing what we're good at and what we're designed for, which, my way of thinking, should be a lot of our lives.
Sure.
A lot of our lives are spent in those areas that are our strengths, or at least they should be.
Yeah.
But even then, Jesus wants to be involved.
Right.
But we're tempted in those situations to rely on ourselves.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Someone else said, what would have happened if they did have authentic faith? What would the story be any different? I thought that was a great question, and got me thinking, what would have happened? Let's imagine that instead of having misplaced faith, that the disciples were these mature, amazing believers. What would have happened? And in that conversation after church, we both concluded that the storm would still hit.
Yeah.
That is not that they would have avoided the storm, because that's a guarantee. That's just life.
Right.
The storm still would have happened, but they probably would have not been quite as panicked. They probably would have been more calm about it.
Sure.
If you imagine the scenario that this is not the first time that they're going to drown on the Sea of Galilee, but maybe this is the 12th time that has happened with Jesus. Suddenly they've seen him 11 times come through before and calm the storm.
Right.
They're probably not going, Lord, don't you care? We're going to drown. They're probably going, we need Jesus to do what he's always done, and he's faithfully done it.
Yeah.
So their stress level probably would have been a lot lower. Their confidence would have been a lot higher. Their faith would have been stronger, and it would be in the right place. It would be in Jesus, who, sleeping or awake, was still in control.
Right. The disciples oftentimes, remind me of. I mean, they're in training, right?
Yeah.
They're not.
Can we just say we're in training?
Well, totally.
Yeah, can we just say there and we're? Let's just use the same pronoun. We flip that pronoun because it's us too.
So true. So true. And where I think that, sometimes you can look at it from, many years removed now, and you go like, come on, guys. He's right there. You know what I mean? But they're also in training too, and they were kind of, in that moment, it's human nature to, try and figure it out, try and fix a situation. And then all of a sudden, they're like, okay, we can't do this anymore. We got to call in the big dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So relatable.
Yeah.
So relatable. The thing that, a day later now that I would want to maybe talk about further and maybe emphasize a little bit more than I ever did was just that idea of how Jesus rebuked the wind, but he asked the disciples. To me, I think that really captured my attention. And then I went back and looked at the other Gospels just to make sure. And it is consistent. All three of the stories, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are consistent on this, that when Jesus speaks to the wind and the waves, it uses the word he rebuked them, which is a really strong word.
Yeah.
And to me, that gives me a lot of comfort, because when there's challenges in my life and stressful things and danger and things that are scary, or things that feel threatening in my life, I love the picture of Jesus rebuking those things. I love it that he takes a firm stand against those things that are threatening in our lives. And he is this strong, God of the universe, who's in control of all nature, who now is standing up and rebuking those things. And then in all three of the Gospels, it uses a much softer word for what he says to the disciples. It either says he said, or he replied, or he asked. And the tone to me is striking, because I feel like when we think about this story, we think Jesus is rebuking the disciples, not the wind. That he's really mad at them for being so faithless or misplaced faith or little faith, and we think he's just so mad at them. And really, he is upset. Or firm is maybe a way to put it. He is firm with the wind and the waves, and he's quite gentle with the disciples and with us. Because he realizes we are people in process, and 2 out of 3 of the Gospels have him completely dealing with the storm before he deals with the disciples. And I to me, I really appreciate that picture too. I remember learning about this several years ago. But research has shown that none of us learn in an unsafe environment. If we're in a dangerous, threatening environment, we cannot learn. Our brains don't have the capacity to learn. We're just trying to survive in that situation. So we're not open to learn or to develop or grow when you're in a dangerous situation. It's only when people feel safe and secure that they are now in in a place where they can learn.
Yeah.
And so Jesus, I love that as we read the story here in Luke, he takes care of the storm, he takes care of the danger first, and then he says, let's reflect on that.
Yeah.
What did you learn?
Right.
What did you see about your own faith and where it was placed and where it was misplaced?
Mm-hmm.
And how can you grow? And I believe that sometimes we're too hard on ourselves when we're in the middle of a stress, because we're not these, heroes of faith.
Sure,
we're not these models of trust.
Yeah.
Instead, we're a lot like these disciples.
Right.
Jesus, don't you care? We're going to drown. And yet it's afterwards.
Yeah.
When we see God's faithfulness, when we see how he's brought us through, that it's really valuable to have that time of reflection.
Yeah.
And say, where was I off in my trust? What did I learn about God's faithfulness? What did I learn about his power?
Yeah.
And how can I now incorporate that kind of on the other side in this safe place of learning and growing and developing?
Right. It reminds me very much of a story I heard a while ago of this dad, and he was coaching his son in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up with this kind of theory, or this practice that he started involving with his son, where after the game, if his son still had his baseball hat on, his baseball cap on, or he still had his, whatever, the chalk,
eye block,
like if he still was mentally in the game, felt like he was mentally in the game, that on the way home or the way to lunch, the dad felt like he could talk to his son about the game. But he was saying that if he got in the car and his hat was off, his eye blocker was off, and he was just wanted to sit in the car, the dad then would take his cap off and they talk about nothing. They talk about, what video game he was playing, or where they were going to go eat for lunch. Because he felt like in that moment, it was visual for him to not be in a place of learning, and when they wake up Jesus, instead of Jesus going, guys, you know what I mean? These are the lessons I've been teaching you. You know, he's like, let's rebuke the wind first, and then I can teach later. I mean, I know it's not recorded, but you can guarantee when they landed, he brought it back up again.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Where he was like, hey, remember when we were just there? Let's talk through that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Kind of a thing,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I still am taken, that's a great analogy. And I'm really taken by what you said earlier, that this was something the disciples must have, not only Jesus reinforced, but they reinforced over and over again.
Yes.
They talked about this.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, there were probably a lot of things in their encounter with Jesus that they talked about, but this was one of those things that over and over again they brought up, because it was such an eye-opening experience for them.
Yes. And I think they also wanted to relay that to other Christ followers too. You know what I mean? That they were going, well, when we were on the boat, when we were this or we were there, we put our faith in our ability. We put our faith in, things that weren't right, where our faith should always be in Jesus from step one all the way to panic.
Yeah. That's right. And so they wrote it down, and we've been the fortunate recipients of it ever since. Yeah. God's people have then looked to this story for centuries now, and we've learned from the lesson. For us, because we're not physically with Jesus like they were, Jesus who was human and needed to sleep, we are. Our faith is that God never sleeps. The Bible tells us that He never slumbers, He never sleeps.
Right.
And so we're not worried in the same way that God has fallen asleep, but it's still tempting for us as believers to feel like he's not focused on me. He's not interested in this. He's got bigger concerns than my concerns. The things that I care about. And the story reminds us that God is never checked out.
Yeah.
He's never, lost sight or awareness of what we're going through.
Right.
And we can learn from their example. And of course, we can learn from our own lessons of faithfulness as we see God's faithfulness in our lives.
Yeah.
I we need to tell ourselves those stories
Yes,
too, and
yes,
tell
for
our
sure.
kids and our
Yes.
and our friends the stories of God's faithfulness in our lives over and over again
Yeah.
until they're tired of hearing about it, because we need to remind ourselves
Yes,
of that as
very
well.
much so. Very,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ryan, for
Thank you, Doug.
the conversation, and to our enthusiastic listeners and watchers, viewers every week. This has been a deeper dive into a sermon that I gave on Luke 8:22 through 25, where it wasn't, "Where is your face?" It was, where is your faith? It's the idea of faith. I called it Faith's Easy Pitfalls. So if you want to catch it, you can catch it online at greenvalleychurch.com. We're grateful to have you along with us. Until next time, this has been Unhurried with me, your host, Doug Kyle, and I look forward to talking soon.